You had trigeminal neuralgia, and this is a very neuropathic pain. And you tried all the medications, anticonvulsants, opioids, multiple surgeries, brain stimulation. And the best that you could get was a little bit of relief in the intensity of the pain, the frequency of the episodes, but never kind of being pain-free. And this was for what, 16, 17 years.
Yeah.
And then you found on the internet simple thing that could help, like brain retraining. And in 3 months, your pain went down 80%. That is
Yes.
amazing. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this channel. I have today another great interview to share with you. I'm bringing to you Niki Jones from the UK. She is a person with lived experience of pain for many years and an experience of recovery from chronic pain. And today she's going to tell us her experience, what happened to her, and then how she was able to recover from many, many years of chronic pain. I don't want to delay this interview anymore because this is going to be amazing. And I'd like to thank you, Nikki, for being here today to share your experience with our audience today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, Nikki, your story is amazing. I saw you on other interviews, on other channels, and I saw how amazing was your story. And I hope this interview with you will give hope to people who are living with a situation similar to yours. You had trigeminal neuralgia for many years, which is a kind of neuropathic pain. For those of you who don't know, trigeminal neuralgia trigeminal nerve is a nerve that comes from the brain and innervates the face, the sensations of the face. And trigeminal neuralgia is a terrible facial pain, very unpredictable, very difficult to treat. And Nikki is here today. She's not in pain anymore, and she will tell you what happened to her that she was able to conquer trigeminal neuralgia. So, Nikki, why don't you tell us, our audience here, how did your pain start? What happened to you? How was this trigeminal neuralgia affecting your life?
Okay, so at the time I was working in London, in the centre of London, as a professional working for the British Horse Racing Board, so the government of horse racing. And I loved my job and I was working hard. I was playing hard. I had a livery yard I was sort of helping to run as well. And I was having a great time. I was doing really well. I was about 32, 31, 32. And I went home back to Wales for Christmas, as you do. And I was sitting there watching the Mikado with my grandmother on Christmas Eve. And completely out of the blue, it was like somebody stuck a cattle prod to the side of my face. And I suddenly had this extraordinary pain. Like, it literally knocked me onto the floor. And I was lying on the floor going, what was that about? And it just didn't stop. It just kept whack, and then there'd be a small gap, and then it would just whack again. And my family's not very good about, you've got to be sort of actively bleeding before they take you to hospital or anything. And it was Christmas, so we just went, oh, it's some kind of weird migraine, and just sort of crack on. And I did, but it just completely out of the blue, suddenly it would just have this extraordinary pain. But somehow I managed to get back to London and eventually did go to the doctor, who didn't really help and thought it might be a muscle in my neck or something. It was a very confusing time, and I was trying to deal with this. I'd had a whiplash injury when I was younger, when I was about 16. So I'd always had sort of the odd neck back issues that sort of niggled through my life. But so we sort of assumed it was something to do with that. And I was seeing a physio. Eventually she sent me to see an orthopedic surgeon, who just went straight away, said, why have you come to me? This is trigeminal neuralgia. And I was like, that's a lot of big words. So I went to see a neurologist, was diagnosed pretty much straight away, really classic TN in probably all three branches. And they put me on carbamazepine, which is the sort of the first port of call they use it, and that just ruined me. I couldn't even walk on it. It was really tough. I reacted really badly to the drug. So they swapped me on to gabapentin. So I had this, and so so it was actually the medication that stopped me working rather than the pain. I was struggling on at work, even though this pain was, really intrusive. And yeah, I was in quite a mess. And luckily I rang the UK has a Trigeminal Neuralgia Association, and I rang the helpline and talked to them. And they suggested that, certainly for somebody as young as I was, to look into having surgery for it. I'm desperate. I'm not at work. My life is sort of falling down around my knees at the time. And I had private health insurance with work. So I went to see a neurosurgeon, and he looked at my MRI scans, because they have to check that you don't have multiple sclerosis or anything like that, especially when you're young. And they had a massive blood vessel compression on the nerve root as it comes out of the brainstem, which is what they think might be at least one of the causes of trigeminal neuralgia. So I had surgery very quickly, within sort of 4 months, really, of getting this condition, which is very fast. And it seemed to work. It certainly seemed to alleviate the pain. So I was recovering from the surgery, which to me, I'd never had surgery before other than for my wisdom teeth out. So, having, a hole drilled in your head, and, it was all quite big stuff for me. Tapered off the gabapentin, went back to work, and promptly got made redundant as I literally walked through the door, which was just awful, because then I was left in London with 2 horses and, no way of keeping them, and so it felt very unsafe. And then basically the pain came back. I went back onto the heavy drugs, and everything was just, my life had literally within 6 months had gone from being really good to being really scary and really, really horrible. And I brought my horses back from London to Wales. Luckily, we've got land in Wales, so I could sort of stick them on there. But I was really disabled by this point. And the drug I was on, the medication was so much that I was starting to not be able to walk properly. I was having to walk with a stick. It was really difficult. So then I went to see another neurosurgeon here in Wales. Well, I saw a neurologist first, who sent me to see a neurosurgeon, and I thought that trying to do the surgery again was a good idea. So I had the surgery again, which just made things worse. By this point, I'd got a lot of constant pain, as well as the sort of electrical stabs. I was getting attacks of, all through the years, no one ever really diagnosed this, because it was such a weird, incapacitating pain. It was somewhere between a migraine and a trigeminal, sort of, basically the trigeminal nerve was just like giving up and just going into a complete free fall, and I'd be completely incapacitated for days with that. So I was in a real mess at this point, and life was very, very dark.
How many attacks of trigeminal neuralgia? Because you were having a day, or was it a constant at this time? Because we count in terms of how many attacks a person has per day to see if the therapies are working or not.
It fluctuates, because obviously it responds, as we know, it responds to what's happening in your life as well. But for me, I didn't know when it was going to happen. So by this time, anything that triggered the pain, like going outside in the wind, would trigger the pain. So I was going out in masks and scarves and talking, brushing my teeth, anything to do with my hair. I had to have my hair really short. all of those would do. So I was avoiding all these things, light, loud noises, everything. I was really getting hypersensitive to life in general at the time. So I was having a lot of attacks, but I was also fearing having a lot of attacks all the time. So you get very tangled in that. But I never had a period of remission. Some people's trigeminal neuralgia goes into remission and they don't have it for a few months or years, whereas I never had that. Other than the gap after the first surgery, I never had any sort of relenting from the pain at all, which was, really hard to deal with. So I eventually had a third surgery. This is sort of taking it over quite a few years now, which they thought maybe that the Teflon was starting to cause a problem on the nerve root, and maybe that's what was causing the pain, which helped. It left me with permanent numbness down my face and half my tongue, my teeth, but it did actually leave, the pain was less for about a year, which was lovely. But then that came back. And at some point during this, I was started on fentanyl as a pain relief, because I was still not getting any kind of decent pain, management at all. I'd done a pain management course at some point, but it was just before the science we use now came in, and it didn't make much sense to me. It was all back pain related, and I was like, yeah, but my pain's in my face. What's use as a pain gate in my spine, So although it helped sort of in some ways practically, it didn't make that much of a difference for me. So we got to the point where I'm just so desperate, and the surgeons are telling me I'm the worst case they've ever seen, and that I've got this intractable condition. And at one point I made a pact with myself that if I was still like this bad in 5 years, I was just going to, not carry on. I'm living with my parents, so I'm now in my sort of late 30s, early 40s, and I'm living with my parents, who I love them dearly, and they've been an amazing support to me, but you don't want to really live with your parents. I'd had my horses all this time. I'd come back from London with a very old pony and a youngster who'd actually injured himself. And he's still with me. He's 27 nearly, and he's out in the field now. And he gave me a reason to keep grinding on, to keep going. So I'm, forever grateful for him for that. So I did have a lot of privilege, being sort of looked after and being relatively safe, but it was still a really difficult time.
Can you tell me a little bit about the fentanyl? So how many years were you in pain? So you ended up having opioids, 3 surgeries in total. How many years had you had pain, and how many drugs beyond opioids did you take?
I tried all the anticonvulsants, to varying effects and various combinations of, but I never reacted very well to them. The side effects would always sort of be worse than any sort of positive benefit from them. I never took any SSRIs because I react really badly to tricyclic antidepressant, which I was on trimipramine for ages, and then moved to nortriptyline, very sort of low dose, but coming off them is just pretty catastrophic. And so early on they they put me on fentanyl, and I was using the lollipops, so instant relief. So that's done a number on my teeth, which is great. It took them a while to find the sugar-free alternatives. But no, at some point I was on ridiculous doses of patches and lollipops, and that affects your life in a very negative way, because I sort of became a blob. I didn't have any real, it sort of destroyed my emotions, my personality, my drive. You're just sort of plodding on. And it wasn't until was seeing a rehab consultant, which was one of the best things that happened to me. And she persuaded me to just drop the dose a little bit, and it was that sort of made me wake up a little bit. But just going back, you said 3 surgeries. I had 3 microvascular decompressions, but actually I ended up having a motor cortex stimulator implanted as well, which is, I was approved for deep brain stimulation for this, but Wales won't pay for it because it sort of counts as experimental, which it is. So my surgeon in Wales did a motor cortex stimulator on me, which isn't into the brain. So the electrodes are on the surface of the brain. And I think it made me slightly more stable, but it didn't have any real effect. And of course, that I had problems with the wires. I had to have several revisions. So again, you've got this whole thing. You're trying to help yourself, and the doctors are trying to help yourself. And this was a major surgery, which impacts me to this day. But it really didn't address any of the issues in any sort of meaningful way. And obviously it's a massive surgery. I had to have my hair shaved off, and my skull lifted up, and this massive battery in my stomach that used to really get in the way. And then didn't really do much. And it's caused, like, the wires cause interference with anything, so I can't talk on the phone or wear earphones on this side still, because it interferes with the wires. It's but these are the things you do. These are the things that you put up with, because the pain is so severe, because the pain is so destructive to your life. You will take anything that possibly might help, and this was where I was taken. And unfortunately, once the motor cortex stimulators didn't do anything particularly good, it felt like I was sort of abandoned, because we were like, well, we can't do anything more. You just go away, like, you're too difficult. Which is why when I say that I eventually saw the rehab consultant, she was the best thing that happened, although unfortunately I didn't get to see her very often. But she started to shift my thinking from the biomedical to what was happening in life around me, and starting to plant the seeds for a different way of looking at pain.
Wow. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that you found someone that was helpful, talk about a different approach. So why don't you tell us about the turn in your life? Because clearly now you don't have the same pain that you had before. And in total, how many years did all this take from when you were 31, 32? When was in your life that this turn happened?
It was sort of 17 years. It was in 2018 that I'd been seeing this rehab consultant for a little while, and she'd helped me to reduce my medication enough, so I started to wake up, and she was encouraging me to try ways to expand my life. And I'd started adult ballet lessons, and I'm a rider, so I'd never done ballet, so that was it was a really different thing. And it was very social, so I was going out with my neighbors and going somewhere, and that was new and good. And I was also doing something with my body that wasn't to do with pain. It was to do with moving my body in an interesting way. So I started to just start looking at life and possibilities a little bit more. And I just lucked out. I found an article on Facebook that came up that talked about a brain retraining app, and it introduced me to the sort of more modern pain science, because I hadn't looked at this for years. I'd basically been told to stop, trying to find a cure years ago. So I had. But it looked to me, it was like, this is a bit, this looks like a bit scammy. I'm not convinced about this. It sounds, it doesn't sound right. How can something as severe as this, how can I address it with, these kind of techniques. It didn't seem to be, it just sounded too easy. It didn't sound like something that could happen to me because, of course, I needed drugs and surgeries and all this kind of stuff. So I went searching, and I have a science background, so I like to make sure what I'm doing is, it's got a proper scientific basis. And I found Lorimer Moseley's TED talk about pain. And I was like, okay, so this is real. It actually means something because, this is a scientist, a neuroscientist telling me this. And so that just gave me the impetus to actually commit to this. And I was in a position where I suddenly just like, I really need to commit. I really need to try this because although life is getting a little bit better, I had that feeling that I was sort of on the brink of something. So I really committed to sort of the brain training and the sort of the program and the meditation and all of this. And I very quickly started to feel better. But the understanding of the modern science, the understanding that my brain was involved was absolutely fundamental. I'd always known, because it's a nerve, I'd always known that the nerve was getting things wrong, but it was the nerve that was getting things wrong. The nerve is damaged. I've been told by the surgeons that my nerve root looked grey and stretched and really damaged. And then I was told that maybe it remyelinated with all the cross fibers, and it all sounded very sort of permanent and damaged and wrong. But I was still like, yeah, but it's still, how can, I know that this touch on my face is not, somebody's not stabbing me with a knife or got a cattle prod there. So I knew there was a disconnect between what was going into the nerve and what was my experience of it. So being able to reconceptualize that as the brain being involved and the brain's interpretation of the messages it was getting from the nerve made me think, well, there's somewhere I can control this. There's I have some input into this. I'm not passive here. I can intervene. And learning that there were ways of intervening, and that was calming my nervous system down, and how much else mattered, from nutrition to sleep to everything. And it made much more sense why I was changing my lifestyle, but in very positive ways. But reducing the fear of the pain was key, because I could, even though I still didn't know when a stab was going to come, I could sort of rationalize it by going, yeah, but it's nothing, it's not damaging me. So that was very fundamental to me. And it wasn't easy. It takes a lot of courage to actually let go of that fear and of the sort of conditioning of the response. But weirdly, I got to a point where I was suddenly like, all these things I'm doing, the meditation, and the sort of psychological, the reframing, and a bit of journaling, and this kind of way of being, and just being a bit braver and getting out and doing things regardless. I wasn't pushing through, so I wasn't like doing things in a way that made me crash afterwards. But I was just stretching myself and allowing myself to do things that were fun, and using my curiosity, and reminding myself what life was about. But it was then I suddenly went, do you know what? Even if the pain never goes away, this is a better way of living. I kind of let go of the need to have the pain reduced to recover. And that's also key, because that intensity is another thing that doesn't help our systems feel safe. So looking back, I think that was an important sort of flip in my way of being. But to be honest, I was very lucky. It was very fast for me. Within 3 months, I realized I'd reduced my pain by about 80%. Yeah, it was a considerable improvement in a very short amount of time.
Nikki, so that's amazing. So let me just summarize this because I don't want people to miss. You had trigeminal neuralgia, and this is a very neuropathic pain, and you tried all the medications, anticonvulsants, opioids, multiple surgeries, brain stimulation, and the best that you could get was a little bit of relief in the intensity of the pain, the frequency of the episodes, but never kind of being pain-free. And this was for what, 16, 17 years.
Yeah.
And then you found on the internet a possible simple thing that could help, like brain retraining. And in 3 months, your pain went down 80%. That is
Yes,
amazing.
that is
So,
amazing.
so my question for you is, what made you, maybe it was because you tried everything. And I have patients that I offer this brain retraining to them, and I offer this possibility earlier in their journey, right when they are starting to have chronic pain. But it's almost like they need to try everything in order to believe what I'm saying. And that's frustrating to me because I say, why would you still want to go to injections and opioids and surgeries if this is what can help you now? What would you tell a person in that journey, in the beginning of their journey, to convince them that this is what's happening, the brain retraining is something to try as soon as possible. You don't even need to wait until your pain becomes chronic. But they say, well, but you were telling me that the brain is in the pain is in my head. You are telling me that you don't believe me. This is gaslighting. You are telling me that my pain is not real. And that's not exactly what I'm trying to tell them. So what language should we use as healthcare professionals to help our patients to see pain differently, to give a try to this? Because it doesn't have side effects, right? It's not a pill that you take that will give you side effects. As you said, at most, it will not work, but it doesn't hurt to try. But you need to try hard. I think why it worked for you in 3 months is because you gave your all. You went deep into this brain retraining. You said, I'm going to try this with all my strength and my might. You just didn't I'll do a few sessions here and there and see how it goes. No, you need to put all your strength into that. So can you help us to help other people here who are in that situation? They're still not believing. They are, skeptical. I don't think this brain retraining would do anything for me. So they don't give their all. So what would you say?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And this is also why I'm really supportive of sort of public health campaigns that educate people about sort of more modern pain science, because it is really, we're brought up, we hit our leg on the table and it hurts. We know that damage equals pain, and and then we have the whole sort of, especially with women, our pain gets ignored, and all the way through our lives. So it's very easy to hear it's all in your head when people say these things to you. And because historically, of course, we're very good at separating our brain minds from our bodies, when actually we are just one experience, one entity. So it's very hard to cut through that and have people hear that this is worth trying, that this isn't dismissing their pain or trivializing it. I always start with, when we do education events and everything, I always start with, your pain is real. And I think that for any healthcare professional, the very first thing is to validate that person's experience, that their pain experience is real. And letting people get to a point where they understand that the brain is where all our pain is. This is where our experience of pain comes from. It's the brain's opinion of how much danger we're in, whether that's, a massively broken leg, or it's got it wrong, because our brains get things wrong a lot. Which is why things like the use of illusions are brilliant in this, in getting people to understand that you can't always trust what your brain tells you, because it's a prediction machine and it's doing its best and it just wants to protect you. And sometimes that protection system goes into overdrive. And this is where we get, sort of chronic pain. But it's a perennial problem. It is a really difficult thing. And I look back, people say to me, if somebody had said this to you earlier, would you have listened? And I'm like, I can't say whether I would or not. And it is very much about timing, and that can be frustrating when when you know what you know and somebody's not ready to hear it. But you can't force that on anybody. All you can do is keep planting the seeds, keep letting them know that this is something that is available to them, and that that it does work. This is the thing, which is why I tell my story, which is where people like Fiona tell her story, because the more recovery stories we have there, the more we can get this information out to people, the better, the easier it is for them to accept that this is real. And for me, like, it was seeing Lorimer's talk, it was, making this more mainstream, which is why I do spend, a lot of time doing the sort of public information events, because that's where it's the most fertile ground. But I think I think we should be teaching this in schools. I really do. I think kids should know this, so we can sort of almost start to inoculate people against chronic pain earlier on.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think this will be inspiring to a lot of people. And I want people to know that, you, Nikki, you are available on the internet. Nikki is a patient partner in research, in public education. She's also a pain coach, and you can find her. So why don't you share where people can find you on the internet? And also, I'll put all the links to the Lorimer Moseley talk in the description of this video here if people want to go and watch, because that was transformational in your life. I will also, put the links in the description of this video below where people can find you. But why don't you tell us what is that you're doing now? And clearly, you can wear a bang in your face. You can let the wind. So you don't have pain anymore. Like, tell us how you're doing today in your daily life. And in terms of pain, do you still have pain? Does it still come back? Are you using any medication?
So I had a really gnarly time coming off the opioids. That was a really, really difficult time. And thankfully, I was lucky, because of all the techniques I used for my pain, I could use for the withdrawal. That was a really tough time. And thankfully, I've come through the other side of that now. I'm currently, I'm stuck on very, very low doses of medication that I just, it's not that I can't come off them. It's just that the preparations aren't available right now for me to come off them slowly enough. And my systems have got so much more secure now that soon it's going to be easy to come off. But it's tiny doses compared to what I used to be on. And I don't need them for pain. The most I get now is I get the odd headache, which, again, is a sort of it's a shadow of the ones that used to incapacitate me. I used to have sumatriptan injections and stuff like that. Now I can usually get rid of them with meditation and maybe a hot hot water bottle. But they are very, very minor, and they are a sign that I need to do a bit, my self-care maybe has been slipping, that maybe life stresses have just, are a bit too high. Tien, I get the occasional tweak, but it just doesn't bother me. I just ignore, I just sort of like say, I treat my brain, I talk to my brain like it's a cute puppy. I'm like, you daft thing, why are you doing that? And I just sort of pat it, and it stops, and that's what works for me. 2 years ago, I cycled across the British Isles, England. So that's 150 kilometers, I think. We did it in 3 days. And the weather on the middle day was horrible. And I was coming down the steep hill in the Peak District, and all I had on were glasses. I had my face out in the wind, in the rain, and everybody else was freezing. And I was just grinning. And I was so grateful because, 4 years previous, I would never have been able to do that. It took a long time. It didn't take a long time, but it took a lot of work to decondition those triggers. It wasn't a case of just going, oh, well, I'm fine now. I deconditioned them. So I went out into the field with my masks on and everything. And I sort of calmed myself down, did a lot of safety talk. And then I did graded exposure. So I would open my mask for, a second and then put it up and then sort of build up the time and the exposure. But I also added, because I do a lot of dog and horse training and I use clicker training, so positive reinforcement. So I added that in as well. So I'd have little sort of jelly beans or little sort of bits of chocolate. And I would open myself to the wind, and then I would pop in the chocolate and I would shut it. And so that I'm literally training my brain like I would do a puppy or a horse at this point to do something. And it worked really well. And I did that with wind, with not with cleaning my teeth. That was I did that without the chocolate, because it's kind of thing. But all the way through. So, that took a lot of. I was lucky I'd done the dog training, the horse training, so I knew how to break things up into small pieces and do it. And I found that was really effective for me. But it was based on the science and the knowledge and the understanding. Present moment awareness, again, is key to all of that. Being in the now, the curiosity. But no, I very rarely have pain. And when I do have pain, I meet it in a very different way to how I used to. There's no fear anymore. Like I say, I meet it with that sort of affectionate sort of like, oh, and it usually is a sign that I've been pushing in some way, whether that's emotionally, whether that's physically. I mean, my life is incredibly stressful at the moment. I've got things going on which are beyond my control that I can't control, but I'm still doing, amazingly well, considering, I live on my own now. I'm working. I don't think I'd ever work. Still staying well is a lifestyle that does take up time. And some of those things feel a bit like I had to retrain myself. It's like, because me going out with my friends and having coffee and cake with my friends is actually part of my health care. It's part of staying well. You have to actually train yourself out of thinking that that's a triviality, that's an extra. It's not. That's actually fundamental for me to staying well. So it's a lot of involvement, which is again why being a pain coach is why I went that route, because I really wish I'd had somebody to walk alongside me in that journey and finding out. So being a pain coach, it's not about telling anybody anything. Obviously I do make sure that they are on board with the science and they understand what why we're doing things. But beyond that, it's like any coaching, it's allowing the person the space to find out what's going to work for them and, coming up with their own solutions. And it's incredibly rewarding. And I did a general transformational life coach training, so I can coach anybody, but I didn't want to stick to one sort of school of brain retraining, because I think that it very much depends on the person in front of you, what they want, what they need. That is the sort of not the downside to this work, because I see it as an upside, that you get to practice a lot of things and find out what works for you. But people always want to know what worked for you, what was the one thing that worked for you. And I was like, there is no one thing. That the one thing is that there is no one thing. That you've got to find what works for you, and that can change over the years. What
Yeah.
there are mainstays for me. Meditation has been very important. I have not missed a day for 6-7 years now, whatever it is, since 2018. And that sense of being present. As a kid, I was very in my head. I was always off daydreaming. So it was a big change to move to being somebody who is far more present. But it has been very important for me. The other side of this is being a patient partner, which is being involved in research. And the irony is I'm actually working with Lorimer Moseley, so that was a nice bit of circular stuff, and he's amazing. And we're doing a big systematic review on pain education and how it affects people's sort of pain. And there's a lot of people doing pain education really badly out there. So I'm delighted when, this is why I'm glad to, come on your channel who, because you do it really well. There's a lot of people doing it really well, but there's a lot of people who are still doing it in the death by PowerPoint didactic way, which is not as helpful for people. But yeah, just research also on the opioid front as well, trying to make life easier for people on opioids, coming off opioids, or stuff like that. So I've ended up doing a sort of eclectic mix of things, and I'm loving it. And I'm even a PhD supervisor, which is interesting, having a lived experience person as a PhD supervisor for somebody, which is I love seeing it. So we are, people with lived experience are being included far more in research, which I think very strongly is the way for research to be far more effective for people out there living it. So yeah.
Absolutely. So where can people find you as a coach? And it's so amazing. I would recommend you as a coach to a lot of my patients, because I think you do much better than you have the language that they need to hear. I'm not against psychologists and professionals doing pain coaching or psychotherapy, but they don't have this experience that you have, and that language that really resonates with a person who is sitting in front of me and has chronic pain, because you can tell them, I know what you're thinking, I know what you're feeling, I know what's going on in your mind, because you also had those things. So I am a big believer that people with lived experiences of recovery from pain, people who conquered chronic pain, they are the best coaches to another person, because they walked the walk, and they're not just giving you theory, they're giving you real life experiences. And I totally agree with you. When people watch my videos, like they watch the other videos of patients who I interviewed on my channel, and the comments are, tell me what was the one thing that you did. I want to do that one thing. And the answer is always, there's not one thing. And even if there was one thing that worked for you, Nikki, may not work for another person, because each one of you are unique. And I don't know, Nikki, if you know, but this book is all about that. So you are unique, which means if you complete this book, which is a 90 journaling prompts, your journal will not be the same as the other patient that will complete this journal, because each one of you have a different experience. And the reason that I wrote this book is just prompts, 90 prompts for people to meditate on their life. Is for them to forget their pain, not to think about pain. It's to forget your pain and live your life. But people are so stuck in 24 hours, all they think is their pain. I'm terrified about what I'm seeing on the internet. Like, there's so many social media. And when you search for the word chronic pain in some of those social media outlets, it's terrifying. It's just people saying, look how I am disabled. I am in pain 24 hours a day. And this is not the message that neuroscience is giving now. We have so much new discoveries. We know much more about the pain system. You don't need to be suffering 24 hours a day in pain. We have better ways to treat. So in this book here, I want them to experience those things, experience that life is possible. There is life beyond chronic pain. So, Nikki, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I can't thank you enough. I think even if we can help one person with this video to open their mind, to explore the world of neuroscience education, to explore the world of brain retraining, will be amazing. So that is our journey. Um, I just want to remind people before we close that this video is not to give you your treatment, your management. Neither Nikki or I, we are here to treat your pain. This is for educational purposes only. We are here to open your mind for a possibility that maybe you didn't think before, which is brain retraining for chronic pain. But if when you are watching this video, if there's any emergency, like you're not feeling well, please call an ambulance or go to the nearest emergency department and talk to your doctor, your physiotherapy, or psychologist about these possibilities and tell them, I heard about this. What do you think? And maybe you can find Nikki on the internet and she can be your coach because she's now a pain coach. And we will link in the description of this video here how you can find Nikki. So Nikki, do you have any last words that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Yeah, I'll leave them with the sort of words I always start with, which is your pain is real, but also the courage that you use to live with that pain every day. If you can use that courage to look deeper at brain retraining, at different ways of being, you might be really surprised at what happens. And there's hope.
There's hope. Yeah, that's what we want to leave today's video with people. There is hope. You don't need to be stuck in this chronic pain. Your brain is very powerful and you can control your brain and you can rewire the pathways in your brain. And then the pain will not be controlling you. You will be controlling your pain. Thank you so much, Nikki.
Thank you so much.